to episode number 9 of Off the Shelf, a podcast that looks at what it means to be a true follower of Jesus, specifically in the context of Scripture and the message of William Branham. With me again is my esteemed co-host, Rod Bergen.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever it is that you are listening to us. We literally have listeners from around the globe. I think we're up to 34 countries so far. We're very happy to have you part of our conversation today and happy for you to join us.
Rod, last time we started our conversation with James Rozak, and today we're just going to pick up where we left off. And James, the last time we talked, you had begun to tell us what started your journey out of the message.
Yes.
So this time, I would like to start by asking you what events led you to the decision to leave the message.
Definitely compounding issues were taking place. Kind of what I was alluding to, there was, as many people are aware who are in the message circles, there was kind of a brewing of questions that were being asked, and I perceived them to be legitimate questions. I think any question should be perceived as a legitimate question. And the problem for me, though, is I didn't have answers for them. So I more or less was waiting for the more seasoned, more established ministers to provide those answers that people were asking. And I guess one of the early things that was really bothersome to me was the way in which the people who had questions were being treated. And I saw it very up close, within my own church. And again, people whom I love and appreciated, but was a little bit taken aback by the way that people were responding. And in one way, I understood it because I was feeling that same apprehension. It was very uncomfortable to have people asking questions, but at the same time, surely we have an answer, and I don't have them. I looked, I tried to dig inside my own resources, and I never perceived myself as being an extremely theologically minded person. So, I felt like surely somebody's gonna be able to step up. And so, no, you're streaming other services. I was beginning to stream on a very regular basis, other churches and whatnot, and waiting for somebody. And really all I was hearing was, there's people asking questions and you better avoid Facebook and, all these things. That was the response, and that was bothersome to me. But at the same, on that note, it wasn't that it wasn't causing me to doubt at all. I was just a little bit disappointed. But I'd say there was compounding things that were happening. I think I'll kind of get back to the questions that were being asked because obviously they were problematic. But at the same time, I was also beginning to feel a little discouraged, I think, at the lack of the gospel that was not being preached. I had felt that way for a little while, but with everything that was transpiring with questions and whatnot, I noticed that the amount of time that was spent lifting up William Branham was escalating. And, I was beginning to think, well, the answer should be able to come from the Bible. If we have something of substance, we should be able to draw that from the Bible. And so I began myself as a minister, I began to really focus on the gospel. And consequently, I was always interested in reading other people. And I made the mistake, perhaps, of picking up a book by Timothy Keller called The Prodigal God.
Great book.
And yes, it was profound to me. It really had an impact on me. And it began opening up a question of the people outside of the message, and kind of going back to Jake's question. He threw kind of a question in there, like, can only the people in the message make the rapture? Is it only us that are qualified? And what makes us qualified? Those kinds of questions, because the behavior that I see sometimes doesn't seem to equate to an elite people. And then you look at the quality of people outside of the message. And one of the main things that I think played a role in my decision to leave was my pastor. I give him absolute credit. He was proactive in doing things that were unconventional. We had a need in the church, and he would try and find a way to help that need. And so he had myself and my wife learning a form of counseling called Caring for the Heart. It was led by I believe he was a Baptist minister. So we were learning counseling from a Baptist minister, which obviously would be problematic to a lot of people, and it was controversial. And anyways, I got to fly down to Colorado Springs and spend a week with this man. His name was John Regier. And what I observed for that week blew me away. The humility, the concern that he had for people. He would show up in the morning with a paper bag lunch, and he would leave with that same paper bag lunch folded up, and he would take it back home with him. He didn't accept money for what he was doing, and he spent 20 years counseling people to restore their marriages. And just the way, the method, the care, the concern, the wisdom, all those things, I was utterly blown away, thinking, how can a man outside of our ranks have this much insight and wisdom? And to be honest, when I was within the message circles and I would observe how people were treated in counseling offices with their pastors, I was always thoroughly bothered. They didn't have much help. And so again, it was just a thing. I was thinking, if I am elite, so to speak, spiritually elite to this man, what is it that I have? Is it just that I believe in a man named William Branham and I have some theological perspectives that supersede his? That entitles me to something far greater. And that paradigm began to really bother me. And I remember me sitting in the hotel with my wife and thinking, you know what? If God is going to take me with my weaknesses and my failures and my shortcomings and my lack, and he's going to leave that man behind to go through tribulation because he doesn't see things exactly, I have a problem with that.
Sure.
And I remember me and my wife basically said to each other, you know what? I can't see it that way. We have a problem here. And that was something that it was just a seed. It was just something that went in us that it just didn't sit right.
Now, if you were ministering all the way up until the end, I can't imagine how much harder that is than even what most of the rest of us dealt with. Can you speak to that? Like, what was that like? And what was the final nail in the coffin that caused you to just say enough's enough and I can't do this anymore? Yeah,
well, I fully admit I was using quotes less and less and less. And I was doing it not because I didn't believe the message. Right up until the very end, it wasn't that I didn't believe. It was I felt that we need, Brother Branham himself even would say, like, we have to get back to the original faith. And so I was thinking, if we're going back to that original faith, there was no Brother Branham said to that. I should be able to just take the Bible and use the Bible per se to make my case. And so, and because I was going through the counseling thing that I was doing, I was very aware I was doing a lot of counseling with people. I was profoundly aware of the amount of abuse that a lot of people had suffered. So I was very much preaching from the perspective that, that the gospel was supposed to set the captives free, was supposed to heal the people. It was supposed to have this effect on. So I was wanting to preach from that. And the more I did that, the more people would come and say, you're not using quotes enough. I had numerous people take me out for coffee, and that was all they were saying to me. Are you sure you believe the message? And they were obviously concerned because there was all this other stuff happening. The questions, people, Believe the Sign at this point had come out and published their humble pie. So yeah, there was an immense amount of pressure, and I felt like I was going to be a catalyst to bring our church kind of around the corner. And I was even asking other message ministers, do you think, because I had this perspective that why can't we get back to that original gospel? Why couldn't we do that and not say Brother Branham said? I asked some other ministers, like, do you think, and I won't name them, but do you think we're always going to be saying Brother Branham said? And I had some ministers, high-ranking ministers would say, Brother James, in 10 years, I doubt we'll be saying Brother Branham said,
Really?
because we will be so established. Yeah, I was actually, and that encouraged me, because I was thinking we should be able to do that, because this emphasis on William Branham was bothersome to me. And I was now beginning to see problems. I couldn't reconcile them. I was confused about that, but I still believed it. And I thought, well, maybe we have a flawed prophet, but what he said was true. So, I was operating from that perspective. And I think the final thing that really broke was I went to a meeting in Tennessee. I was invited to speak at youth camp, and I don't know how many kids there were, 200-300 kids. And at this point, I was the counseling side was really blending into my preaching side, and I was being very honest about things. And I was bold enough to say in those meetings that, there's things that your pastors will do and say, and there's things that your parents will do and say that will actually hurt you. And what I was trying to say, it wasn't that I was saying the message is bad. It was saying, there's such a desire to hold on to sometimes precepts and principles and laws and rules that we forget that we're dealing with people. And there could be, there could be people sitting there being actually abused under a ministry. And maybe that's you. And I was saying this to the young people that were in the crowd. And of course, the response from the other ministers was instantly negative. I don't think they talked to me, but a handful of times that I was there. But the kids came running to me. They did. I've never had a more effective service in my mind. It was the last time I would ever preach. But yeah, I had kids lining up to talk to me, and the other ministers were very bothered by the fact that I was talking to them one-on-one.
Right.
And they didn't know what I was like. I had kids coming up to me saying, I don't want to go home, because when I walk through my front door, my dad's going to be on the other side of that door. And I get to watch my dad abuse my mother and me and my brothers and stuff like that. To me, it's like, put down the quotes. There's somebody who's here who's hurting, and what's more important right now, like maintaining the outward appearance of things or the actual heart of this person who's hurting. And if it means that something has to be ripped apart to fix this, then let's rip it apart. That's kind of where I was coming from. I was sincere as all could be. And I got a letter of reprimand.
Oh my goodness.
For what I did. And I understood. And I'm sure my pastor was talked to. I was not asked to preach after that.
The irony of that, James, is I distinctly remember the winter youth camp that you're talking about, and there were several members of the youth group from Johnson City, where I lived, that had attended that. Some in my own family, and they were so impacted. They could not stop talking about what an amazing youth camp it was, and you specifically. So you ministered to someone, reprimand or not.
And this is one of the big problems in the message and with message ministers is abuse goes on and it doesn't get dealt with. It just gets covered over because they don't want it coming to light. They want to ignore it. And so people get damaged, people get hurt, and nothing's ever done because they don't have any effective tools to deal with it, because they just tell you, read the word, listen to tapes, and it doesn't do anything to solve the root problems. In fact, it makes it worse when you hear William Branham talking about take him out back, and hit him with a bunch of whips or branches or whatever you do. And it's just not a way to deal with problems. And the abuse just gets compounded.
And the real issue, like some of the people, like even those ministers in that meeting, it's not that I look at them and think they're bad men. I think that once you're invested in this culture, the appearance of things is more important, for one. And number two, they don't have the tools, and they're afraid of the tools required to actually make a difference. So you go back to the standby. Like, I don't know how many times I would hear, like, just get into the tapes. Just get into the tapes. That's the answer. You got to get into the... And somebody who's sitting there, who I'll give you another example of a young girl who came and talked to us, and her father, who is a pastor in the message, I still see him invited to, had his daughter, because she was rebellious in whatever way he perceived, had her on the floor, banging her head against the floor.
Wow.
as a means of correction to get the demon out of her. That is a solution. Like, I look at stuff like that and I'm like, there's something wrong. And that's kind of where I came from. Something is really wrong. And that, some people came from they would look at the errors of William Branham. They would look at the lies and the discrepancies. And those things weren't the tipping point for me. It was me looking at kind of a different view and looking at the way that the people were actually being treated, whether they knew it or not. And they were so determined to lay themselves down and surrender to this message and become... And if there was something that was wrong, it was their fault. It was their fault. You don't have enough faith.
Right.
You aren't believing this message enough. And that was the solution. And it didn't work anymore. And I don't take a brush and say, this is the way it is in every church. It's not. But it's prevalent enough to make me say, okay, why is it this way? And that brought up, me looking at it from a bigger picture and stepping back. And I think it's the stepping back and looking and thinking, why is our culture this way? Why are our churches this way? And by doing that, you then have to begin looking deeper at the source. Like, why do we do church this way? Why do we believe this way?
And when you really want to help someone, people start throwing rocks, as you said. They didn't want you to highlight the problems. And what's really ironic is that the word minister, so we have ministers, message ministers. The word minister means to attend to the needs of someone, to care for them,
yes,
to look after them,
yes,
to treat them, to help them. But
yes,
that's not what's happening.
It's the facade. It's maintain the facade. Are you coming to church?
Yeah.
Is your dress long? Is your, and that's really what it came, that's what I really began to see. Are you in line? Stay in line, brother and sister, stay in line, keep marching in line, or stay with the message, stay with the word. And that's what matters. It doesn't really come down to people, what's going on in them. And yeah, that hurt me so bad. And then when I came back to my church, and my pastor, who I had so much respect for, I've never heard him preach so hard about William Branham. And me and my wife sat there and we looked at each other and we said, wow, something's wrong. When I walked out of my message church for the last time, it was a terrible event. It was one of the worst services I was ever in, where I'm not going to go into it. I don't need to. But when we walked out, I'll honestly say, it wasn't that I was thinking, well, William Branham's doctrine is way off. I couldn't say that. I was still too scared to even say he was a false prophet at that point. I just knew, as for me, something is so wrong that I need to remove myself from this. And that's where my journey of really honestly looking at things. I think I was looking at my emails yesterday and I came across an email I sent maybe a week before I left. It was to Jeremy. It was to Jeremy Bergen. And I asked him about the tabernacle, the church ages being written on the wall. That Brother Brown talked about. That was the first time I was publicly able to ask a question to somebody. And I think I knocked Jeremy's socks off, because he was like, you're asking me this question for real? Like his first response was, wow. His first sentence just said, wow. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I think what you were seeing in the message and what we continue to see, and why people are actually leaving, is that reaction to the questions and the evidence that has come out. The guy by the name of Leon Festinger, and we'll talk about what he wrote, but I want to read a quote, because it's really astounding. It goes right to the heart of this. He said this: suppose an individual believes something with his whole heart. Suppose further that he has a commitment to this belief and he's taken irrevocable actions because of it, like leaving family, trashing friends, which we see all the time.
Yeah.
Finally, suppose that he is presented with evidence, unequivocal and undeniable evidence, that his belief is wrong. What will happen?
Yeah.
The individual will frequently emerge not only unshaken, but even more convinced of the truth of his beliefs than ever before. Indeed, he may even show a new fervor for converting and convincing other people to his view.
Absolutely.
That's what's happening in the
Absolutely.
message. And
it is.
People who are actually spiritual, the people like yourself who are concerned, really want to minister to people, are saying, hold it. this is a problem. I didn't sign on for this.
Yes.
I didn't expect this to happen. I'm a Christian. I want to serve Christ, so I am out of here. That's what's happened to people like Jeff Jenkins. It's what happened to other ministers like yourself who've seen this problem manifesting itself, but this increased fervor, which has nothing to do with the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see that. Yeah. It's remarkable to see that transition that happens, like when you come up to that point of a question. And I know I think you're going to probably talk about it in some of your podcasts, the cognitive dissonance and what actually happens to somebody when they come up to that juncture of, we have a real big problem here, and I'm going to you kind of abandon yourself, to one way or the other. Either you come up with an absurd explanation, or you actually go through the pain of looking at it, and it hurts. But, I'm just so thankful that there were people who did that. Like, I'm so thankful for what you did and others that were plowing that road, because, wow, I don't know if I could have done it if I didn't have that knowledge that, there's something that I need to look deeper at, because there's a problem here. There's a problem here.
Well, that's why we put up the Believe the Sign website in the end, because we said, we found all this stuff. What do we do? Just leave everybody else to find it on their own?
Yes.
That's just about the most irresponsible thing you can do.
Yes.
As I said, it cost me virtually all my friends, but
yes.
But I'm actually not going to tell the truth about what I found. I just couldn't live with myself.
Yeah.
Right. That was my experience too. I get asked why all the time, even from people who aren't in the message anymore. Some of them, why do you need to do this? You just need to move on with your life. This is negative energy, and so on and so forth. And I, as a introvert like you, James, I'm tempted to do that, to just go in the shell and say, I don't want to deal with the backlash and all of that. But at the end of the day, I come back to, I am so grateful, just like you said, that Rod and Jeremy did what they did, and John Collins and others that sort of paved the way ahead of us. And if they took the heat and did that, then anything I can do that may help someone else, I want to do that, whether it's painful or not.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
James, you mentioned some questions that you had, and you kind of hinted you might want to talk to them a bit more. What were some of the questions that really were problematic for you?
Well, there's the usual suspects of Ira, the cloud. What do you do with that? If you're honest. And I was really learning to be honest. When I was seeing problems, and I was looking at them, and it blew me away. Like, some of the most, and then it kind of triggered things like looking back, the when William Brown would talk about the cloud on Hoffman's head. And he, you could see the quotes where he's talking about, well, can you see the face in there? Can you see, his nose and, all that. And I was so bothered by that, because I would look at that and I'd be like, something's wrong with me, because I can't see those. I can't see the face.
Well, where that came from is somebody at Perry Green's church made a bad photocopy, and it kind of looked like a face in it. And
increase the contrast in the sky.
Yeah. So when you look at the actual picture in the magazine, you go, I don't see it.
Sure.
You look at it like one of those guys who, those kind of funny paintings where you kind of blink your eyes out, and suddenly something appears in the background, and you're expecting that to happen, and it never does.
And the problem, it's not that, that wasn't a trigger for me, but what it did, it showed me the mentality that a person has towards something as absurd as that, to kind of push myself back down to say, oh, something must be wrong with me, or I'm not spiritual enough to see it, but it's there, and when these things were coming up, I came in contact with Alfred Pohl. In 1998 is the year I came into the message, is when I came across that for the first time. And I did everything that I could possibly do to shove that away, because I was in the midst of this beautiful oasis of people that were so loving and sweet. And I was in this place that was so wonderful. And yet I read that. I came across it. Somebody gave it to me. And it blew me away, because I didn't know what to do with that. And I shoved it away. And I always remembered it. I always remembered that I had shoved. So when all this was coming up, stuff like that came back to my remembrance. And I know what people would say, oh, that's just the devil planted a seed. You could look at it that way, or you could look at it for what it really says and try to come up with an answer. And so like when the cloud, William Branham not being there when that cloud and what he said about it, that is a massive problem for me. Just being honest, like, and then you take, the Clarence Larkin and the church ages and various things like that. The baptism on the Ohio River, and the article. I know people dismiss those articles, but when William Branham is so emphatic that there's evidence in the newspapers, and there are no newspapers.
Well, there actually is one article. 14 people got saved, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And one of the things I'm going to add, too, is for the benefit of our listeners, you mentioned the Alfred Pohl article. I'm going to put a link to that on our podcast site. So if people go to the page that we have this episode on, if you're hearing it, you want to go to the page, we will put that link on the site so you can read it on your own.
There were so many of those things that, I refuse to put them away, and I refuse to bow to the fear that people were trying to project onto people who are, somebody in our church is asking a question, and the response is, I have the answers, but I'm not going to give them to you.
Yeah, I heard that.
Because I want you to feel the pain of what you're doing. That's what you're going to do?
Wow.
That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't have the answers. I'd like to know the answer too, but is that how we deal with people who have questions? And then, endless things that began to pop up. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation. And that tipped me over, and I couldn't handle it. Amazing.
As I think everybody knows, we try to keep these podcasts to a half an hour, so we're going to bring this one to a close, and we will continue our conversation on our next podcast. James, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure.
I'm really appreciating the conversation, and for all our listeners who want to hear the conclusion, hopefully we'll conclude this next week. We could have this going for months, right?
Absolutely.
We'll come back and you'll hear our continued conversation with James Rozak, who is the author of the Morning Mercy website, and I would strongly suggest you go to the site and take a look at it. We'll have a link on the website as well if you don't know how to find it. If you'd like to send us an email, there's a link on the offtheshelf.life website, or you can email me directly at rod@offtheshelf.life, or you can reach Brian at Brian with a Y at offtheshelf.life. We also on our website have a comments section after each podcast. Click on the title of the podcast. It'll take you to the page for that specific podcast. We're starting to get some comments. Really appreciate the feedback, and have a great week, everyone. James, thanks again.
My pleasure.